Hello, summer, and hello to our summer series. This summer, I'm going to be spending our episodes asking business owners to fill in the blank of how I solved. Curious to learn more? Well, let's dive in with our first conversation. Hey there, and welcome to episode 313 of the Roadmap to Referrals podcast, a show about helping you build a referable business. I'm your host, Stacey Brown Randall. My journey from a business failure to a successful business now 10 years in, I know generating referrals naturally and consistently has made all the difference. Working with clients around the world, we leverage the science of referrals, protect relationships above all else, and help you build a referable business. Welcome to the 2024 Summer Series. Hopefully you listened to our last episode, episode 312, where I gave an overview of what would be effectively happening in our upcoming episodes that'll take us June and most of July. I'm very excited for you to listen to these business owners share how they had a problem and how they solved it. But before we dive into our first interview of the Summer Series, I want to actually extend an apology. So if you have been on my email list, so you may be a longtime listener of this podcast, but you actually don't get emails from me. So in that case, this apology probably doesn't make any much sense to you. But if you are on my email list because you've downloaded something from me, you've attended a training, obviously if you're one of my clients, right? You may be on my email list, and a little bit ago when we did the release of my new starter course, the new training I put together, I'm calling it affectionately the starter course. It's called Your Next 5 Referrals. We had some email glitches. And in some cases, people got like 3 or 4 emails from me in like a span of like, I don't know, 30 minutes. Okay, I may be exaggerating. It may have not been that bad, but it felt that bad because I get my own emails. So I know when the glitch happens and I see it and I'm like, oh no. Some of you may not have experienced this at all. You'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about, Stacey. I get your weekly email usually about the podcast episode or whatever. You know, if you're promoting something, I get that email. Great. That's how I want it to be. I want it to be you get that one email, typically on Wednesdays. If you don't open it, typically you get the resend on Saturday, just so you don't miss it. That's what I want from you. I want myself, my emails to show up in your inbox and you'd be like, yeah, cool, I'm going to read that today. Or maybe I'll get to it in just a little bit, but I'm going to make it a point to read it. Not, oh my gosh, why does Stacey keep emailing me like 4 times in like a 32-minute span of time? Whatever, maybe it was a couple hours. It doesn't matter. Regardless, there was a glitch. It was not supposed to happen. I don't know why it happened. So if you were one of the unfortunate souls that got a bunch of emails from me at the end of May, I'm really sorry. I just want to put an apology out there because, you know, running a business that is like 60 to 70% tech, there are bound to be some hiccups, particularly when you don't love tech. But these hiccups probably could have been avoided. It happened because I worked ahead to prepare everything to release my new program, Your Next 5 Referrals, which I'm super excited for the people who are going through that. It is awesome to see them start diving in and going through the modules and the lessons. But I had worked ahead. And then as the date approached that I was actually going to release the program, I kind of forgot that I worked ahead. And then I duplicated my efforts and created more things that I didn't actually need. And I didn't go and check. I didn't follow my own process, my own standard operating procedure of how I do this. And I doubled my work. And then that showed up as double emails in people's inboxes. So again, just an apology. Please know that when mistakes like that happen, I am not doing them on purpose. I am not trying to get your extra attention. I'm not one of those business owners that's like, hey, I'm going to pretend the link is wrong so I have a reason to send you another email so you'll pay attention to it. Nope, that's not me. That's not how I operate. I can't stand it when people do that. If you get an email from me that says, hey, the link was bad, it's because the link was bad. It's because we made a mistake and now I'm embarrassed and I have to fix it. So, egg in my face. It's all good now. I appreciate the grace. I appreciate most people are just like, whatever, must have been a glitch, right? Most people don't complain, which is amazing. But I wanted to just give an apology because this is like my one way to reach lots of you as you're listening to this episode. Though I know I'm not reaching everybody who's on my email list as well. Obviously, we apologized on that end too. Okay, so enough about that. For those of you who accepted my apology, thank you. I can feel you. Let's dive into our first episode. So as a former productivity coach, I pretty much knew that if I had a business owner submit how they solved a productivity issue in their business, it was probably going first. I really do love productivity stuff. I don't coach on it anymore. I definitely use it 100%. I definitely kind of like, guilt my husband sometimes into using it even when he doesn't want to. And I'm always happy to provide to anybody who will listen a productivity tip. So I knew when Kathy, who you guys are going to hear from today, submitted her information to talk about how she solved managing her tasks and her projects in her business so that not everything fell apart when she had to step away from the business, I was like, yep. That's the one we're starting with. So I'm excited to welcome you guys to Kathy. She's going to explain a little bit about what she does in the beginning, just so you guys can have a baseline for who she is and her business. And then, of course, we will dive into the problem as she saw it, of course, how she researched deciding to solve it, and then what she did to actually solve it. And that'll be the format for all of these interviews. And then, of course, I'll have Kathy share, if you're interested in the work that she does, I'll have Kathy share, as I will with all my guests, where you can find them at the end. And of course, we will link to all of their resources in the show notes page. And the show notes page for this interview, where you can find all of Kathy Brown's wonderful information, is stacybrownrandall.com/313. That's for episode 313. All right, so here we go. Now on to the interview. Kathy, I am so glad to have you on the podcast to talk about how you solved a very important business problem. That's one of the things about this series that I am loving, is because as we look through and as people talk about how they solve business problems, it's kind of like everyday business owners solving everyday business problems that is completely out of their zone of genius, but they figured out how to solve something they didn't know how to do before. And as the listeners know, that is not related to what they sell. But I want to make sure, before we dive into the problem that you solved, that my listeners do know about you and your business. So can you share a little bit about what you do and how you work with people?
I certainly can. And thank you so much for having me. So my name is Kathy Brown. My company is Goal Firm. I work with individuals and also a lot of small businesses with under 5 employees, working on systems and process and getting in place really what do we want. So once we know what we want, I talk about a 10-year goal, then we can work on the path to get ourselves from where we are today to where we want to go.
Okay, so this is a little aside about your 10-year goal. I'm kind of obsessed with it. So I know you and I have had this conversation before. For years and years and years, I taught a reverse goal setting process, and I now only teach it to the people who are in my BRB and VIP services, my BRB coaching program and my VIP service, because I only teach it at my end of the year retreat that I do for those clients. And so, but the reverse goal setting process that I teach has you go up to like a 5-year goal and then reverse engineer kind of your way back down to what you need to do next year, right, to be on the path for the 5 years. And then I heard you talking about a 10-year goal, and I was like, ooh, tell me more. So I do want to encourage people who are listening. I'm going to link to how you can find Kathy in the show notes page for this episode, so you don't have to try to remember where to find her. But she's got some great free resources on her website that I'll let her mention at the end as well, about how you can just start paying attention and learning more about setting a 10-year goal, because I think at first it's slightly daunting to be like, oh my, I don't know, 10 years. You know how much life is going to change between now and 10 years? But then also really being intentional about what you want to experience out of life. So I think what you do is really cool. I'm a little obsessed with your 10-year goal framework. So I hope people will definitely check that out.
Yes, I'd be happy to talk to people about my 10-year goal. Like talking of obsessions, yes, I can talk a lot about 10-year goals.
Yes. Oh my gosh, absolutely. Okay, but that's not why we're here. So
No.
we are going to talk about everyday business problems that everyday business owners solved and how they solved them. Some of the problems that people are talking about within this series, most of us experience. And on the surface, they just don't seem that hard or difficult until you're living with it. And then you're having to create the space and the commitment to solving it. And I know that when I hear other people talk through how they solved a problem, it really helps inspire me and sometimes motivates, swift kick in the pants that I need to like, okay, let's now finally solve this problem. Because I'm sure you've experienced this as a business owner. There are some problems that we will live with for years. We will suffer through for years and years and years before we finally decide, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to solve this problem. Have you found that to be the case for you?
Well, actually, yes. And this one is an example of one that lingered on for multiple years. I won't admit quite how many before I actually got serious about solving it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true how long something sometimes has to fester before we will make time and space for it. I mean, it's no different with with the clients that you and I work with, sometimes I'll have people come to me and they'll be like, okay, I'm finally going to solve my referral problem. It's only been a problem for 6 years. I'm like, okay, better late than never. Let's do it. Right.
Yeah. Well, and there usually is that frequently the incident, whatever it may be, that gets us off from the hold button and then moving forward.
Yes. And we're going to talk about what the straw that broke the camel's back for you was. But first, let's talk about the problem, the issue that you set out to solve in your business. So you were struggling with keeping track of the tasks that you just like, that's like everyone's daily life, right? But just the track of the tasks that you had, not only in your business, but in your personal life. So talk to me a little bit about like what you were doing up to that point, and then why you had to then make a change.
So for years, I have used a paper planner. For many, many years, it was a Franklin Covey planner. And that is how I kept track of everything. I went through their training. I used their system, and the system worked very well for me. Now, at that time, I was employed. I worked in the field of special education. So my personal tasks and my work tasks were different. There were slightly different systems, although my planner contained all of it. And it worked for me for very many years. Like years and years, I did a paper planner. And it's one of those things I will say it worked until it didn't. And that is, that's where I was with that. And it stopped working the end of last year. So in the fourth quarter, really, I was experiencing more and more struggle in that area of keeping track of things and feeling more and more like I was getting overwhelmed and what I was doing was simply no longer meeting my needs.
Yeah, I think that you kind of talk about when something comes to a boiling point, right? To the point of like no return. I'm either going to fix this or I'm just going to let it I'm going to drown in it. And so I know you had talked about a little bit about this has been a growing problem for a couple of years, but then, and I find with business owners, unless something catastrophic happens in your business, that's almost how all our problems create themselves. It's little breaks in the processes. It's little breaks in the system. It's, I always tell business owners when I'm having conversations with them and they're talking about capacity or they're talking about productivity or keeping up with everything. I'm like, listen, I was like, every time you grow, I think the statistic is every time you grow by like 40%, your business processes that you have that served you will break. Your processes, your systems, your workflow, things will just break. And then every time you shift what you're doing or how you work with clients or what you actually are selling or what your area of expertise is, workflow processes and systems break as well. Like they're not usually built to keep up with whatever the new direction is for you. So I sometimes think we forget that. So this had been a kind of a growing problem for you, but then something happened at the end of 2023, like you said, fourth quarter. Walk us through a little bit about like what that moment was, what that kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back was for you, that you said, enough is enough. I'm going to make the commitment to do what I need to do to fix this. Hey there, pardon the interruption. I hope that you're enjoying our business series this summer, focused on having extraordinary business owners talk about how they solved problems in their business that they didn't know how to solve because it was out of their zone of genius. Don't worry, we'll be back on our topic of referrals when we wrap up this summer series. Speaking of referrals, though, it is crazy to think that you could be just 90 days away from starting to double, triple, or quadruple your referrals. The roadmap and the support, plus the accountability that you need, it's just waiting on you. It's all inside my coaching program, Building a Referable Business, which we call BRB for short. Just go to StaceyBrownRandall.com/referable to learn about the program. And then if you're interested, click on the link to submit your application. I personally review all applications, and I'll let you know if you're a fit for the program. Then you can learn more and make your decision. All right, now back to the episode.
Well, there were two straws. There was first the little straw, and the little straw was I missed paying something. And it was not a big deal in the grand scheme of life, but it was like this wake-up call, because for me, that was like, oh my gosh, like finances, I'm on it. So I had started doing some research on work management tools, and that came as a result of someone suggested that I read the book Come Up for Air, which was a really great book. And it laid out components of the business differently than what I had really ever thought about. So that is where I started the beginning of Q4 of last year, is really kind of working that into my time to start doing some research, looking at some things. So that was the beginning part. It was going fairly slowly. I would say I was committed, but it did not feel urgent to me. Then in early December, my mom took a fall. Now, she is fine, and she was fine, but that took a week to get things in place for her and to get the right equipment so that she was safe and so the staff working with her could also be safe and be comfortable. And that right there showed me how much was at risk, because as soon as my attention for a week was taken to something that was critically important and it was urgent in the moment, everything else like started falling like a house of cards. And I realized I had no margin. If I took my head out of keeping track of those tasks for a very short period of time, directed somewhere else, it all started cascading down, and it was miserable. I will just say it was miserable. I mean, it was not great that my mom fell. And then it was like, okay, on top of my mom falling, then I had to confront the fact that I was not on top of these things in a way that allowed me to feel like things were getting done in a timely manner, that I could easily keep track of it. And that when something happened in my life that took my attention, I had no way to easily look and quickly sort out the essential from the not essential.
I think that is such a poignant story that you share, because it could have been anything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. It could have been anything. And let's be honest, I think most of the time these things are things that happen in our personal lives that sometimes jolt us to reality for how we need to fix things in our business world. I always tell the story when people ask, like, okay, you have streamlined and simplified and pared down the model of how I work with clients on the back end, from like the back end side of the hours then that I put into work. And part of it was because I thought more than a year ago, I had a kid coming home for a year of homeschooling, like a reclassification year and a homeschool year. So I was like, I gotta have a business that'll function around that, and then that didn't happen. But I was like, well, I kind of like the scheduling. Like, I don't think I would have ever gotten here to the streamlined version of how I run my business had I not been planning for something that could have been extremely disruptive to my business had I not been prepared for it. And so I had the foresight, like, oh yeah, this kid may be coming home in the fall, and it is not anywhere near the fall right now. With you, it was sudden. And I think sometimes those dominoes fall a lot harder and a lot faster, in particular with your mom. Like, one day she's fine, the next day she's fallen, and you have to be there.
Right. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think the other lesson that I have taken away from that is just the general concept of, as you said, building in a little bit more margin for whatever it is that happens. I can't say that I've always done that well. But that is something, on my mind, that like, what does this look like? What I went forward and did solve that big issue of task management and staying on top of things. And yet there still is, like you said, that sense of, gee, when those things come up and it takes your time and attention, what does happen with everything else?
Yeah. How do you survive?
Right, okay, exactly.
So I want to talk about exactly how you came to the decision you came to for what you then use to help you manage all your tasks and processes. And when I was looking through like how you did your research and like how you researched solving this problem, it was very methodical. And I was like, oh my gosh, Kathy is after my own heart, right? It was very much like, let me look at this, then let me do this, then let me try this. And then, and everything was so methodical, like step by step. So I really want to make sure that you share with our audience kind of like, okay, you've decided I've got a problem. I can't manage all these tasks. I was using a paper calendar, then everything kind of fell apart. I needed something that was not paper calendar based, that was more digital based. So talk about how you solved this problem, like what the steps were before you made the decision of what would ultimately, I guess, solve the problem.
Yeah. So I started, as I had mentioned, reading the book Come Up for Air. And that was helpful. Just gave me a different structure and a way to think of it. And that author, Nick Sonnenberg, he talks about work management systems. And that's kind of the catch-all he puts around it. And when I was reading that, I'm like, okay, I'd heard of Trello. I had played with Trello. So I had an idea of what he was talking about and referencing, but I had never used any of it. So there was someone that I knew that had been a longtime user of Trello, and she used it both in her personal life as well as her professional life. And she had recently transitioned to Asana. So I had a conversation with her in terms of, well, what did that do for her? Just those types of tools. How did she use it? Why would she suggest it to someone? And then what was her switch? Why did she switch from Trello to Asana? So that's where I started, was a recommendation from someone that I knew, did not know her well, but I knew someone who could introduce us. Other people had talked about her and had a short conversation. So that was very helpful. So the book kind of put the idea in my head. Then I found someone to give me some kind of overall information. And then I did a little bit more online research. What I learned is that I didn't really have a sense of some of these categories of apps and software, because this is not space that I had ever been in or really played in. So I didn't really know. And so I decided I just needed to know a little bit more about what that space was in the area of productivity and what were some of the features and what were people saying. So I did a little bit of general research. Then I came up with what were the features that were important to me. Like I like the board view, but again, since I came so many years out of a paper planner, I also really like a list view. So I then determined what to me were the features that were critical for me. Like I also, on occasion, as odd as this sounds, I want to be able to print a list. If I am going somewhere and I'm not going to have internet access, or I don't want to be on the internet and I want a list, I want to be able to print it out. So once I determined what I wanted, then I went back to, and I use Capterra.com, which is just a website that you can research all sorts of features as well as read reviews of options in different software categories. And I find this is a really useful tool. I've now recommended it to other people who are considering different software programs as just one source of information. And did a little bit of research in there. And then from that, and from my conversation with the person who had switched from Trello to Asana, I narrowed it down to Trello or Asana. Those were my two finalists, if you will.
So just for my listeners, so they're like, wait, what were those two resources she's talking about? I'm going to link in the show notes to the book she mentioned, Come Up for Air, to the Capterra website that she used to research the features. And then, of course, I'll link to Trello and Asana as well. Okay, so keep going. So you're narrowing it down. You're doing your research. You've talked to someone. You've read a book. You're now like actually figuring out what's most important to me. Then you're narrowing down what your options are. You've got it down to Trello and Asana. So what did you do next before you decided on which one?
So that's when I dug into the features, the specific features. And honestly, one of the things that was the difference between the two is that I can print certain things out of Asana and I could not print what I wanted to out of Trello. So that, along with the recommendation of the person who'd gone from Trello to Asana, I decided to try Asana. And they have a 30-day free trial that has a lot of the features. So my decision was to sign up for the 30-day free trial. I was very intentional with it. And then I was intentional with what I was going to start, because I was determined that by the end of 30 days, I would know if I wanted to pay for it. That was my, to really utilize that 30 days well. I cannot say I've always done that with free trials in the past. So that then I picked the first couple of things that I wanted to do and started right away creating boards and trying just basic features. And again, I was not trying to learn the whole tool. I was trying to learn what did I think would help me the quickest and that would allow me to see how the tool might work for me. So that's what I did for 30 days.
I think that is brilliant, because you were I think what I love the most about this is how intentional you were through the entire process. But you had also had kind of like a breaking point, I wouldn't say a crisis point in your business, to be like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sign up for it. And guess what? I'm actually going to open the software every day
exactly.
and make it work for me. Because it reminds me of when people ask me like, Stacey, okay, for referral tracking and stuff, which CRM what should I use? What do you recommend? I'm like, the one you'll open on a daily basis and
Yep.
use. Like they're all kind of the same. There's not
Hmm.
one usually that's better than the other. I mean, depends on features and pricing and things like that. But I'm like, just I need the one that you'll freaking open on a daily basis. Like you open
And
email on a daily basis, you got to open this on a daily basis for it to
well,
work.
and that's real, that's a big part of it because I was looking for something that would notify me and that I could look at my list of tasks and I could look at like how it fell out in a week. And on one screen of my computer, I can look at how I'd laid out tasks, and the other one I can look at my calendar. So what I find is then those two views, I can very quickly see if what I thought I could do when I'm looking at what my calendar looks like next week, that's not realistic. So it's also then helped me, and I'm very visual. So it's very helpful for me to be able to see the tasks in a calendar view in one screen and my actual calendar with appointments in the other screen. That visual impact allows me to make changes. So even though this was not something I was intending at the time, I do things in a more timely manner because I can see before I get started in the week what is likely to work or not, and waiting until it does not work. And then I get to the end of the week and I didn't get everything done. I'm making adjustments before the week starts.
I think that's so important when you're putting a new process in place is like, okay, I'm going to try this. It's one or two ways. I'm going to try this. I'm going to work at this for 30 days the way I'm supposed to work it, and then I'll adjust it. Or I'm committed to this, and now I'm just going to adjust it as I go through. I think either are like usually great. Like my daughter started using a checklist to how she kind of stays on top of assignments and things. And I told her, I was like, you won't know what you don't really like about it until you've tried to use it for a
Right.
couple of weeks. And then if the same problem keeps bubbling up, then that's something we need to change on your checklist. And for you, it was kind of the same thing. You're like, here's the two things I want to make sure this thing can do for me. And then you allowed yourself to get really used to using it. And I'm guessing by the end of those 30 days of that trial, if it was working for you, you're probably like, yes, you may charge my credit card. I need
Oh yeah,
this.
it was an absolute no-brainer. But again, that's because I actually, like you said, I think the big thing was I was very clear in my mind of my starting point. And I held myself to the starting point because I can, especially getting in software, I can get a little bit of that shiny object. Ooh, like I can do this. And oh, this says it will do this. And I really held myself to solving what my most immediate issues were. And only now, several months later, have I started to play with some of the other features.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it's like baby steps, right? It's
Yeah.
working for you. Now you're like, okay, now let me build on it. Okay, now let me build on it the next thing. I think that that's the best way to do anything different and new in your business. So,
Yes. And life.
and life, right? I say business to me, it is as if it
I
is
know.
life, but
Well,
I
yeah.
should really say and life and business is a part of that.
Well, right. And you and I have talked about that, that yes, that's a big philosophy of mine is that you have to design your life, and our business or career, whatever it is, needs to fit into our life.
For that life. So very true. Okay. So thank you so much for sharing that. I loved how we were able to go through like, okay, what was the issue that you needed to solve? Why did it become an issue? And then how you went through deciding solving it and then how you solved it. I think this is super powerful for people who are listening that are probably maybe dealing with the same issue. So everything that Kathy mentioned that I can link to in the show notes, we will. So you will be able to find those resources like the book and the research website, and of course, Trello and Asana as well. I mean, there's like 1,000,000,000 others. Kathy and I are not affiliates of any of these. We are not making
Nope.
any money by recommending them.
Nope.
We just like them. So definitely, I will make sure to link to those for those of you who this is a problem you want to solve, and maybe you want to spend this summer solving this problem. You can just take a page right from Kathy's book. She just gave it to you. So awesome. Okay, so Kathy, for the people who are listening who are also like, okay, but I also just want to make sure I know exactly where to get in touch with Kathy because maybe I want to learn about her 10-year goal planning and the 10-year goal stuff that she does. How do people get in touch with you? Is there like, obviously I'll link to your LinkedIn profile and any other social media channels you want me to link to in the show notes page. But is there something should folks go to your website to first learn about you? Is there a resource that they can download? Can they get on your email list to learn more? What's the best place for someone to start who wants to navigate the work that you do?
Well, the website is certainly one place. And on the website, you can sign up for my email list. I do have a lead magnet. So if someone is interested in specifically more about the 10-year goal, I can give you a link that will take people to that lead magnet. And then I do weekly videos. Most of my content is in video format and short videos.
That is awesome. I feel like I just got scolded by you and you didn't know it by telling me
Why?
that
How did I?
most of your content's in video format. And I know my virtual assistant who does most of my social media, her name happens to also be Kathy. She's going to hear this and she'd be like, oh, so Kathy Brown can do videos, but for some reason, Stacey Brown Randall cannot. I always hear that, but
Yeah,
it is all good. It is all good. That's not
it
what
is
this is
all
about.
good. Yes.
All right.
We have to, kind of go the direction that we find ourselves going.
It's so true. I'm a writer by nature. Like
Mhm.
I know getting on camera isn't necessarily difficult for me, but it's so much easier for me to sit down. I would rather sit down and knock out a 2,500 word chapter than I would figure out what I want to say on a 2-minute video. I don't know why. It's just how my brain works.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I can't, because if someone had said that I would like video and do video, I would have told them, I would have laughed at them a few years ago, without a doubt. So you never know.
The good news is we have someone who's actually coming on this business owner series for our summer series that's going to talk about, it's an attorney that's going to talk about how they solved their video marketing needs because they were told the same thing, make more videos. And they're just like, yeah, no, until they figured out how to solve that problem. So it's so funny we're talking about this because it's coming up.
Well, I'm definitely going to listen to that one.
Awesome. You will love Neil. He is great. Okay, Kathy, is there any final thoughts, words, partings that you want to let my listeners know that you want to share with them?
The only thing I would say is, first of all, Stacey, thank you so much for having me on. And really just a word of encouragement is when we find these things that are roadblocks in our path, to search out other people or resources to solve them, because sometimes we can get ourselves hung up over them. And if we find the right person or right resource, like me, like it did not take me that long to solve it, but I had to get out of my own way to begin with. So if you got something, search out some help and get it solved.
Brilliant advice. Thank you, Kathy, so much for being on this podcast with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Kathy, so much for spending your time with us and talking about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is all about some productivity. Love it. Of course, as a reminder, the show notes page for this episode, along with all of the ways that you can connect with Kathy, can be found at stacybrownrandall.com/313. That's Stacey with an E, and that's 313 for episode 313. We're back with another great episode next week, created with you and your needs in mind. Until then, you know what to do, my friend. Take control of your referrals and build a referable business. Bye for now.